Welcome, fellow saints, to the Holy of Holies. I'm Brandon, and this is Cinema Saints. Today I want to talk about How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World is directed by DeBlois, and he has given us the other two How to Train Your Dragon films and Lilo and Stitch. The film stars Baruchel, America Ferrera, Cate Blanchett, and many more. So How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World is set a couple years after the events of the second film. So Hiccup's leadership becomes tested when an expert dragon hunter starts to present himself, and this utopia safe haven is no longer safe for both the humans and the dragons. So when it comes to the How to Train Your Dragon movies, they've been really great so far. I was just really hoping that they would stick this landing for this trilogy, for this third one, because the first one was a very above average children's movie, and then the second one was just really great. And so I was like, all you have to do is just stick the landing, and then this would be a really good trilogy. So as usual, I'll hit the negatives first so I can end on a positive note. And honestly, I didn't have very many negatives for this movie. It was pretty great. So I really only have one flaw with this film, and it comes down to the villain. It was super underdeveloped, and I think that they didn't give enough understanding of his motives, and because you get a little bit of his background and why he does what he does, but it just seems very flat and not really dynamic. Because all he really does is he'll show up and he'll throw some adversity towards Hiccup and his crew and kind of put him through tough situations, but you don't get much of his backstory other than a little tidbit here and there. So I just wish that they could have given us a little more of his motives, a little more of his background, so that we could empathize a little bit with his character, so that it would give that more dynamic villain. And that's really the only flaw that I saw in this movie. So now I want to talk about the positives. I love how the writers in the Train Your Dragon movies actually put their characters through some real adversity to help their characters develop. These characters, specifically Hiccup in the past two movies, have had to deal with some real loss. And so they really know how to give this character something that he has to fight and overcome so that he can move on as a character and develop as a character. And with that loss, even though that these movies are kids' movies, you have that feeling of tension where you're like, I'm not sure if any character is really safe because you've had those different types of loss, whether it be death or some kind of physical loss or anything like that. There's no real safety in this movie series. And so when I'm watching it, I'm fully invested and wondering what's going to happen next. Another positive was the way that the villain interacted with the dragons and how he trained them, and whether or not it was ethical, and kind of adds that dynamic to his character. Even though that I said that he is a little flat, he does have that dynamic that kind of contrasts the way that Hiccup and the village of Burke does, how they train their dragons and how it's a very free environment and stuff like that. And so I thought that aspect was really interesting and a really awesome part that that the writers put into this movie. I also want to praise the animation and the camera work for this movie. It was phenomenal. This is one of the best animated movies that I've seen, just a part of animation. Every little grain of sand was just perfect. The way that it makes it feel like you're like in that helicopter shot going through some waterfalls and stuff, and it has that little bit of shake in it, was just perfect. So props to the animation crew for How to Train Your Dragon, because this movie looks phenomenal. So my last positive for this film is how they stuck the landing for this trilogy. I thought it was perfect. They didn't just kind of have like the 20 different endings and they just didn't know how to end, what to end with. They just stuck with it, did the two different things that they needed to wrap up, and finished it. And it was done very, very well. So props to the writers for choosing what they wanted to end with and being very concise about it, because when you're filling up all that space with all the different endings that you're trying to wrap up, it just becomes too crowded at the end, and you're checking your watch trying to figure out when this movie is going to end. So now I want to go into some of the theological aspects that I saw in this film. So there's a part in this film where the villagers have to uproot their lives and seek refuge somewhere else from Burke because of the incoming threat. And so as they're seeking refuge somewhere else, they stop to rest on this island and they start to kind of settle in. And Hiccup comes in and is just like, why are you guys settling in? We're moving on to this bigger and better place. And he promises this bigger and better place. But all the villagers are very reluctant and kind of grumbling and just, what's wrong with this place? And so those villagers just kind of started to doubt the reality of this better place. And that's where I see a little bit of a parallel between the villagers of Burke and the Israelites. Although the villagers of Burke, they weren't escaping slavery or being enslaved or anything, I did see a little bit of the Israelites in them because they were moving from one place to a place that they were promised. And so in the Israelite narrative, they begin to doubt God and Moses and the reality of this promised land. But eventually, in the end, after a lot of hardship and after a lot of loss, they end up getting there finally. So although the film doesn't follow too close to the biblical narrative, I did find that very interesting because they did go through a lot of doubt and stuff and then had to regain the trust of Hiccup and his leadership to lead them to this new land. And so I thought that was just a fascinating aspect and a good theological aspect that could be pulled from this film. So with all that said, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World is an absolute treat to watch. It is fun for the entire family, and it has a compelling story, and it's just a perfect way to end this trilogy. So if I were to give How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World a rating, I would give it 8 dragon scales out of 10. So if you haven't seen any of the How to Train Your Dragon movies, you're really missing out. It's a whole lot of fun for the entire family. They're a classic family movie trilogy, and honestly, I would be content for them to just kind of stop here and do that. Even though that they're making a lot of money, they may probably crank out another one or two. But I think this perfect wrap-up to the trilogy was just really great. Well, thanks for watching, fellow Saints. Continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, go in peace.